That strip of waterfront is community property, and your little dock comes down by Friday, or we tow it and bill you for the crane. That was Diane Whitlock. 3 terms running as president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Board. Standing on my gravel turnaround in white sneakers that had never seen a day of mud. Reading the words off a clipboard like a verdict she had written herself. She was talking about the dock my father poured the footings for in 1971. On a parcel of shoreline that has carried my family's name on a recorded deed since before her subdivision was a cornfield. She did not know that. She had never once pulled the document. That is the whole story, really. And I am going to tell it to you slowly, the way it happened, because the part that matters is not the shouting. The part that matters is what was sitting in a fireproof box in my hall closet the entire time. What would you have done, standing on your own land, holding a coffee mug, while a woman in pearls told you that the ground under your boots belonged to a committee? My name is Walt Carver. I am 61 years old, and for 34 of those years, I worked as a licensed land surveyor. First for the county and then for myself, which is a detail Diane also never bothered to learn. A surveyor spends his life on a simple idea. The ground does not move to match the map. The map is supposed to match the ground, and when it does not, you go back to the oldest honest record you can find, and you trust it over anybody's opinion. I have walked property lines in snow up to my knee and in heat that bent the air over the rod. I have testified in boundary disputes more times than I can count, always for the paper, never for the loudest man in the room. That is who I am, and it is going to matter. I own 11 acres on the north arm of Cedar Hollow Lake, in the high country where the pines come down to the water and the mornings smell like cold stone. My great-grandfather bought the original shoreline parcel in 1949, when this end of the lake was logging land and the road was 2 ruts and a prayer. My father built the cabin board by board, hauled the lumber up himself, and in 1971, he poured the footings for the dock with a borrowed mixer and a level he checked 4 times. My wife, Karen, and I raised our daughter in that cabin. When Karen passed 4 winters ago, I scattered part of her along the tree line where she used to sit in the mornings with a book and a cup going cold beside her. So when I say the land is mine, understand that I am not making a real estate argument. I am telling you who I am and who I come from and who I lost there. The subdivision came later. Cedar Hollow Estates went in across the road in the early 90s. A ring of vacation homes and a clubhouse with a fake bell tower and a homeowners association with bylaws thick as a phone book. For years it did not touch me. My parcel predated their plat, sat outside their recorded boundary, and paid its own county taxes to its own county address. I waved at the weekend people when they came up in their loaded SUVs. I sold a few of them firewood by the cord, split and stacked and seasoned a full year. Cash in a coffee can on the shelf in the woodshed. I pulled one of them out of the ditch with a chain, and my truck in a March mud season, and would not take the 20 he tried to hand me. I plowed the bottom of the shared road some winters because I had the blade, and they did not. And nobody asked me to, and nobody thanked me, and that was fine. Because that is what you do for the people who live near the water you live near. Live and let live, my father used to say. And for the better part of 20 years, that is exactly how it went. With no clipboard and no letterhead and no trouble worth writing on a folder tab. Then Diane Whitlock got elected president, and the waving stopped. I want to be fair to her, because the easy thing would be to make her a cartoon, and she was not a cartoon. She was a real person with a real plan, and that is what made her dangerous. Her husband, Greg, ran a development company 2 counties over, the kind that buys lakefront in pieces and assembles it into something with a gate and a brand name and a marketing brochure full of words like legacy and sanctuary. I did not know any of that in the beginning. In the beginning, I just knew that a woman I had never met drove her white SUV up my private road one Tuesday in spring and told me my mailbox violated community standards. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my dump runs, and I had the truck bed half full of brush when she pulled in. She stepped out in a linen blazer the color of an unripe lime, sunglasses pushed up into a sharp blonde bob, and she looked at my hand-built cedar mailbox post like it had personally insulted her family. She had a clipboard. I would come to know that clipboard the way you know a neighbor's dog. "This doesn't meet the approved fixture list," she said. "All mailboxes in the community are the black aluminum standard. I'll need you to replace it within 30 days. I set my mug down on the tailgate. I told her, politely, that I was not in her community, that my address was county, not estates, that I had never signed a covenant, never paid a due, never voted in one of her elections, and that the mailbox had stood on that post longer than the clubhouse had stood at all. She smiled the way people smile when they have already decided you are wrong and are only waiting for you to catch up. "Everyone on this lake is functionally part of our jurisdiction," she said. "We maintain the standards that protect everyone's property values. 30 days, Mr. Carver." Then she got in her SUV and backed down my road too fast, gravel ticking off the wheel wells, and I stood there with a half-full truck bed and a feeling I had not had in a long time. Not anger, exactly. Recognition. I had spent 34 years watching people draw lines on maps and then insist the ground had to obey the lines instead of the other way around. I knew this kind of trouble the way a man knows weather. So I did what I always did with trouble. I went inside, I got a clean manila folder out of the drawer, and I wrote the date on the tab in block letters. April 9th. Incident 1. That folder is the reason I am able to tell you this story with dates instead of feelings. The first notice came in the mail 11 days later. A formal violation, printed on Cedar Hollow Estates letterhead with an embossed seal, citing my non-compliant mailbox and assessing a fine of $50, payable to the association within 15 days. I read it twice at the kitchen table. Then I did not pay it. Instead, I wrote a one-page letter, plain and unangry, explaining that my parcel was not part of the association, that I held a recorded deed predating their plat, and that I owed them nothing. I attached a copy of my county tax statement showing my separate parcel number. I mailed it certified, return receipt requested, and when the little green card came back with a signature on it, I stapled the card to my copy of the letter and put the whole thing in the folder. Incident 2. You might think a tax statement and a certified letter would settle it. It did not. What I have learned, surveying boundaries for 3 decades, is that a person who has decided they own something does not surrender to paper unless the paper is held by someone they have a reason to fear. Diane was not afraid of me. Not yet. To her, I was an old widower with a brush truck and a stubborn streak, and stubborn old men were a category she clearly believed she knew how to handle. The second notice came in May, and it doubled the fine and added a new violation, this one for an unapproved structure, by which they meant the dock my father built. $100 now. I read it, I filed it. I added nothing emotional to the record. Incident 3. The third notice came in July and cited the dock again, plus my woodpile, which they called an unsightly accumulation, plus the color of my front door, which is the same barn red it has been since the Nixon administration. $250 total now. I filed it. Incident 4. Each time I wrote the date and the time and a single flat sentence describing what the notice said. No more. Because a record is only worth what it can prove. And a record full of a man's anger proves only that the man was angry. By August, the folder was thick enough to stand on its own edge on the kitchen table. I should tell you about my daughter, because she is the reason I kept my temper through all of it. Her name is Sam, short for Samantha, and she was 17 that summer, living with me full-time since her mother died. Sam has her mother's stubbornness and my eye for detail, a combination that I suspect will make her formidable and difficult in roughly equal measure for the rest of her life. One evening after the third notice, she sat down across from me at the table, slid the folder over, read through it, and said, "Dad, you should be writing down the times too, not just the dates. If this ever goes anywhere, a lawyer is going to want the times, and you won't remember them in a year." She was right. From that night on, every entry in the folder carried a date and a time, and Sam started keeping her own log on her phone, a running note backed up to 2 places, because she said she did not trust one. She photographed the notices. She photographed the mailbox, the dock, the door, the woodpile, all of it, with the date burned into the corner of the image. I told her she was being thorough to a fault. She told me thorough to a fault was how you won. I want you to remember her, because she comes back at the end of this, safe and proud, the way the story owes her. The fall is when it stopped being letters. A man showed up in September wearing a navy polo shirt and a lanyard, carrying a clipboard of his own, and announced he was there to conduct a compliance inspection of my dock and shoreline. I came down off the porch and asked to see his credentials. He showed me a laminated card that read Cedar Hollow Estates Code Enforcement, with his name, Brad, printed under a seal that looked official until you looked twice and saw it did not belong to any government I had ever filed a survey with in 34 years. I told Brad evenly that he was standing on private county land, that he had no authority to inspect anything of mine, and that he could leave the way he came. He smiled, said he was just doing his job, and took photographs anyway, from the public road, of my dock and my shoreline, and, I noticed, of the exact line where my land met the water. Then he got in his car and left. I wrote it down. September 14th, 2:40 in the afternoon. Incident 7. The fake inspector was the first time I understood that Diane was not improvising. She was building something. A man does not laminate a fake badge on a whim. Somebody had designed that card, ordered that lanyard, sent that man up my road with a clipboard and a script. This was an operation, and operations have a purpose. And I did not yet know what the purpose was. That same week, the day and time stamp in my folder started to read like a pattern instead of a string of accidents. Friday, 8 in the morning, a survey flag I had not placed appeared at the edge of my shoreline, a little orange ribbon on a wire, set 15 feet inland of my actual boundary. Somebody had marked my land as if it were theirs to mark. I stood and looked at that flag for a long time before I touched it. Then I photographed it from 3 angles, measured its offset from my true corner with my own tape and my own eye, pulled it, and bagged it. 15 feet. I knew that number was not random. 15 feet of shoreline, taken along the whole north arm of the lake, is a great deal of buildable frontage if you happen to be a man who assembles lakefront for a living. That was the morning I started to understand Greg. I want to slow down here, because this is the turn, and if you rush it, you will miss what the whole year was actually about. Up to this point, I believed I was dealing with a petty board president who did not like my mailbox and my door and my dock. I was wrong, and being wrong nearly cost me the thing I most wanted to keep. I was not dealing with a fussy committee. I was dealing with a development plan, and the Homeowners Association was the tool it was being executed with. Here is what I pieced together, slowly over that winter, From public records anybody can pull if they know which counter to stand at. The county had a public hearing scheduled for the following spring on a proposed shoreline overlay district, a rezoning that would let Cedar Hollow Estates extend its footprint down to the waterline and standardize, which is a very polite word, the parcels along the north arm. For the overlay to pass, the estates needed to show the county a unified, controllable stretch of frontage. My 11 acres sat dead in the middle of that frontage like a tooth that would not come out. If the board could establish, through enough notices and enough fines and enough fake inspectors and enough flags 15 feet inland, that my land was functionally part of the community, then when the rezoning came up, my parcel would be swept into the overlay with all the rest, and Greg's company would have a clean, uninterrupted run at the best deep water on the lake. That is the real story. The mailbox was never about the mailbox. The door was never about the door. It was about the water and the money the water was worth, and the year of paper was an attempt to manufacture a jurisdiction that had never existed. I did not have proof of all of it yet. Not the kind you put in front of a judge. What I had was a folder going on 12 incidents thick, a 15-foot offset I had measured myself, and the instinct of a man who has spent his life watching people try to move a line that was settled before they were born. So I did the only thing I know how to do when a boundary is in question. I went to the county recorder's office on a weekday morning, and I pulled the full chain of title on my own parcel. Every deed, every transfer, all the way back to my great-grandfather in 1949. I sat at the reading table, and I read each instrument with the same care I would give a client's. And I confirmed what I already knew in my bones. The shoreline was mine. The metes and bounds were recorded in plain surveyor's language. The legal description had not changed in 75 years. Then I did one more thing, and this is the thing that won it. I pulled the recorded plat of Cedar Hollow Estates, their own document, the one they filed with the county when the subdivision went in, and I read their boundary line. And their boundary stopped 200 feet short of my shoreline. Not 15 feet, 200. Their own recorded map said, in ink they had paid to file, that my land was not theirs and never had been. I made certified copies of all of it. I put the originals in the fireproof box in the hall closet. I told no one what I had, except Sam, and I told her only this. If this ever gets to a hearing, we let the paper talk. We don't yell at her. We don't argue at the gate. We bring the deed, and we bring her own plat, and we let a judge put them side by side. The winter was quiet, which is its own kind of warning, and I am ashamed to say I half relaxed into it. Diane sent 2 more notices over the holidays, both for the dock, both filed without comment, incidents 9 and 10, and then nothing through January. I told myself she had run out of letterhead. I should have known the quiet meant she had stopped writing letters because she had moved on to lawyers. In February, a sheriff's deputy came up my road, and the trouble put on a suit. His name was Ramirez, and he was apologetic before he was even out of the car. He had a complaint to serve, he said, holding the papers a little away from his body like they embarrassed him. The association had filed a civil action seeking a court order to compel removal of an unpermitted structure on community-managed shoreline, and to recover assessed fines totaling, by then, $900. He handed me the stack. Then he stood there a moment, not leaving, looking at the dock, then at the cabin, then back at me. For what it's worth, Ramirez said, I grew up 2 coves over. My dad bought firewood off your dad for 20 years. I know whose dock that is. He shifted his weight. I have to serve what gets filed. That's the job, and I don't get to pick. What I'll tell you is what I'd tell my own father. If you've got documentation, and it sounds to me like you do, the place that wins this is the hearing, not the road. Don't argue with that woman at your gate. Don't give her a scene she can put in a file. Bring it to the judge and let the judge read it. I told him I understood, and I meant it. He was not the enemy. He was a man doing the one part of his job he was not allowed to refuse. And on his way out, he did something he did not have to do. He wrote up his own contact with me carefully and completely. And when I asked him for a copy of his report, he gave me one without making me ask twice. Incident 12. The deputy who served the lawsuit also handed me a clean witness to the fact that I had been calm, cooperative, and documented from the first day. People are fallible, my father used to say. But most of them want to do right if you make it easy. Ramirez wanted to do right. The lawsuit changed Sam more than it changed me. She went quiet and focused, the way her mother used to go before a hard conversation. She took the folder and turned it into a binder. With numbered tabs and a table of contents she typed herself. She scanned every page to a drive, and then to a second drive. She built a timeline on a sheet of poster board, the way Karen used to lay out the church rummage sale, with a ruler and a pencil and a steady hand. Every incident, a dated box marching left to right across the year. And where the fines were. She wrote the running total in red. When she finished it, she stood it against the kitchen wall, and we both looked at it, and the shape of the thing was undeniable. It was not a series of disagreements. It was a campaign. They counted on you being old and alone, Sam said one night, not cruelly, just naming it the way she named everything. They didn't count on the records. They didn't count on me. She was right about that, too. Spring came, and with it the part of the story I am least proud to have lived through, because it touched my daughter. And there is a line a person does not cross, and Diane's people crossed it. It was a Saturday in April, almost exactly a year to the week after the mailbox. Sam was home alone, out at the shoreline photographing a fresh survey flag that had appeared overnight, when a truck pulled up the private road and two men got out with bolt cutters and a chainsaw. They were not in uniform, and they were not the fake inspector. They were contractors, hired men, and they had been told, they would later swear, that they were there to clear an abandoned structure off association property. They walked up to the gate at the top of my drive, the gate my father hung with his own hands and his own hinges in 1968. And they cut the chain with the bolt cutters and let it fall in the dirt. Sam called me first. I was 40 minutes out at a job site with a total station set up on a tripod and a client waiting. I am not going to pretend the next 10 minutes were calm, because they were the opposite of calm. And the calm I have been describing to you all this time nearly left me entirely. Her voice came across the phone in pieces, the way a person talks when fear is shortening every sentence. Dad, there's two guys. They cut the gate. They've got a saw. They're walking toward the dock. I made my voice as level as I have ever made it, and I told her three things in order. Go inside. Lock the door. Call the deputy and ask for Ramirez by name. And keep your phone recording the whole time, from the window. Do not go back outside. She said, okay. She said it twice. Then she did exactly that, all three things, in order. And she did not panic, because for a year, without ever once calling it practice, we had been practicing. We had been writing down times. A person who has spent a year learning that records win does not freeze. She reaches for the camera. Ramirez was the deputy who took the call, and he was up my road in 12 minutes. By the time he arrived, the men had cut a section of railing off my father's dock, and Sam had every second of it on video from the upstairs window. Time-stamped, already backing up to the second drive before the deputy's truck even reached the cut gate. Ramirez stopped the work. He separated the two men and took their information. He took Sam's statement gently, the way you would with a kid who had just watched strangers with a saw walk onto her home. And he asked the men a simple question. Who hired you? And they gave him a name. The name was not Greg's company, not directly. It was a contracting outfit. The contracting outfit, though, the county would later establish, had been paid by an LLC, and the LLC shared a mailing address with Greg's development office 2 counties over. That was Incident 19, and it was the last one, because Incident 19 was not a code violation. It was a crime. Trespass onto posted private land, destruction of property, and a cut chain on a private gate. The board had spent a full year filing paper to manufacture the claim that my land was theirs. And then, impatient, with the rezoning hearing bearing down and the frontage still broken by my 11 acres, they had sent men to simply take it before the paper was ever true. They had finally committed, all the way, in front of witnesses and a recording, to a position no document on earth could defend. I drove home doing things to that old truck I will not describe to you in detail. And I made the 40 minutes in something closer to 30. When I came up the drive past the fallen chain, Sam was on the porch with the dog, an old blue heeler named Tuck, who is mostly gray in the muzzle now. And she was shaking, and she was furious, and she was completely unhurt. I got out and held onto her longer than a 17-year-old wants to be held by her father in front of a sheriff's deputy. Then she stepped back, wiped her face hard with the heel of her hand the way her mother used to, and said, "I got all of it, Dad. Every second. It's already backed up to both drives." 17 years old, standing on the porch where strangers had just walked up with a chainsaw, and the first thing out of her mouth was the chain of evidence. I have never been prouder of anything in my life, and I have built things that are still standing. The hearing on the shoreline overlay was 3 weeks later, and through a piece of scheduling luck that I have since decided was not luck, but simple consequence, the association's lawsuit against me had been consolidated to be heard the same week, in the same courthouse, in front of the same judge. Her name was Pierce. She had been on the county bench 11 years, and she had a quiet reputation among the people who practiced in front of her for one specific habit. She read every page of every filing, every exhibit, every attachment, before she ever took the bench. Diane did not know that about her. Diane walked into that courtroom the way she had walked onto my gravel turnaround a year before, in a fresh blazer and good heels, like the outcome was already decided, and she was only there to watch it get formalized. She had her lawyer, a sharp, younger man in a better suit than the case deserved. She had Greg sitting in the second row, hands folded, looking like a man waiting on a closing, and she had a slide presentation, projected on the wall of the courtroom, full of phrases about community standards and aesthetic harmony, and the importance of consistent shoreline management for the protection of property values. She spoke for 20 minutes. She used the word jurisdiction 9 times. I counted because counting is what I do, and because counting kept my hands still. At one point she said, and I am quoting her exactly because the court reporter took it down word for word, and I have read the transcript since, "The Carver parcel has functionally operated as part of the Cedar Hollow community for years, and its ongoing non-compliance has imposed real and measurable costs on every single homeowner in our association." Functionally. There it was again, the same word she had used standing in my driveway. The whole case, a year of it, rested on a word that meant, "We have decided this is true, and we would like the court to agree." Then it was my turn, and I did not give a speech. I want you to understand that, because the temptation to give a speech after a year of that woman was the strongest pull I felt in the whole ordeal. I had things I could have said. I said none of them. I am going to tell you exactly what I did instead, slowly, because the shape of it is the entire point of this story. And if you take one thing away from everything I have told you, take the shape. I stood up. I walked to the clerk. I handed her 3 documents, and as I handed each one across, I said one short sentence naming what it was. A certified copy of the recorded deed to my parcel, with the full metes and bounds and the recording date and the county recorder's signature. A certified copy of the original 1949 conveyance to my great-grandfather, and the recorded plat of Cedar Hollow Estates, the association's own filed map, on which I had marked in light pencil exactly where their recorded boundary line fell in relation to my shoreline. Their line stopped 200 feet short of my water. Their own document, the one they had paid to file, said in ink that my land was not theirs. Then I said the only thing I said to the court. Your Honor, I am a licensed land surveyor. These are recorded instruments. The line they describe has not changed since 1949. I would respectfully ask the court to compare the association's own recorded plat against my recorded deed. Judge Pierce had been half smiling through Diane's presentation. Not a cruel smile, the patient, neutral smile a judge wears while letting a party use up their time. She took my 3 documents. She laid the deed beside the plat on the bench in front of her, and she stopped smiling. The courtroom was very quiet. I could hear the projector fan running on Diane's slide that nobody was looking at anymore. Judge Pierce read the deed all the way through. She read the plat. She looked at the pencil line I had drawn, and then she set down her pen and looked up. First at Diane's lawyer, and then past him at Diane herself. And the patient smile was entirely gone, replaced by something flatter and far more dangerous to a person without a leg to stand on. Counsel, she said to the lawyer, is the association asserting jurisdiction over a parcel that lies outside the boundary drawn on the association's own recorded plat? The lawyer rose and began to say something about functional inclusion and long-standing community understanding. Judge Pierce lifted one hand, not high, just enough. The plat is the plat, she said. This deed predates the subdivision by more than 40 years, and it has never been amended. The boundary on your client's own filing does not reach this man's shoreline. There is no jurisdiction here. There was never any jurisdiction here. I am not sure how this case was filed. Nobody spoke. Diane's lawyer stayed on his feet a moment longer, then sat. Diane herself had gone very still in her good blazer, the way a person goes still when the floor they were standing on turns out to have been painted on. Greg, in the second row, was looking down at his folded hands. The projector fan kept running on a slide nobody would ever look at again, the words "community standards" glowing on the wall above a woman who no longer had any. I did not look at her. I had spent a year not giving her a scene, and I was not going to hand her one now. I looked at the 2 documents on the bench, my deed and her plat, lying side by side where the judge had set them. And I let the silence do the only work that was left to do. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because it was not the triumph you might expect, and I think the difference matters. It was something quieter and a great deal heavier. It was the feeling of a line holding. 34 years of watching people try to shove a boundary 15 feet, 200 feet, whatever they could get, to match what they wished were true. And here, finally, in a quiet room, was a line that held because the paper was clean and older than the claim, and because a neutral person whose entire job was to read the paper had read it and said out loud what it said. Now the numbers, because I promised you numbers, and because the gap between them is the thing I most want you to feel. In 1 year, the Cedar Hollow Estates Board had assessed $900 in fines against me. They had collected $0 against a deed that had been recorded with the county 75 years before Diane Whitlock ever printed her first notice on her embossed letterhead. 900 assessed, 0 collected. 75 years on record. Hold those next to each other and you can put your finger on the whole shape of it. Judge Pierce dismissed the association's lawsuit with prejudice, which means they could not refile it. She ordered every fine voided. And because the trespass and the cut gate and the sawed railing had come into the record as part of the consolidated matter, she referred the contractor, the LLC, and the payment trail to the county for review, which is the dignified courthouse way of saying the part of this that had become a crime went where crimes go. Here is the part I did not engineer, and want to be clear that I did not engineer, because the niche of vengeful old men nursing schemes is a place I refuse to live. I did not have to do anything. The shoreline overlay rezoning, the entire reason for the year of fines and flags, and the fake inspector, and finally the men with the saw, depended on the estates being able to show the county a unified and controllable frontage along the north arm of the lake. My parcel, ruled definitively outside their boundary by the very judge who would also weigh the rezoning, broke that frontage cleanly in half. The overlay died in committee the following month for lack of a contiguous footprint. Greg's company had quietly optioned land on both sides of mine, paying good money to hold it, betting on a clean, uninterrupted run to the water. When the rezoning died, the options came due with nothing to make them worth the price. The thing they tried to take was the exact thing they lost. The board that laughed at my deed lost the development that my deed had been standing in the way of the entire time. Diane did not finish her third term. The board called a special meeting that summer, and the homeowners, who had been told for a year that the non-compliant old man on the north arm was costing them all money, learned instead from the new treasurer who actually read the ledger that their dues had funded a lawsuit the association had no standing to bring, the printing of a fake inspector's credential, and a contractor who had cut a private citizen's gate. They removed her by a vote that was not close. A month later, a letter came up my road on the same Cedar Hollow Estates letterhead, signed by the new board president, and it apologized, plainly, for what had been done in the association's name. I read it twice at the kitchen table, the way I had read the first notice. Then I wrote the date and the time on a folder tab, and I filed it. The last incident, a different kind than all the rest. I drove home from the courthouse the day of the ruling, and Sam was on the porch with Tuck, the way she nearly always was. And she did not ask me how it went, because she could read it off my face from 40 feet the way she reads everything. She just stood up and said, "So we keep the dock." I told her we keep the dock. She nodded once, a single settled nod, the exact nod her mother used to give when a thing was finally and fully decided, and she went inside to start dinner. I sat down on the porch step where I have sat 10,000 times in my life, and I looked at the gate my father hung in 1968, mended now with a new galvanized chain that Sam had picked out herself at the hardware store. And I looked at the water going gold the way it does up here in the evening when the sun drops behind the ridge. I thought about Karen reading along the tree line with her coffee going cold. The land was hers too. It still is. That is what I kept, and it was never really about the dock. I want to step out of the story now and give you the lesson plainly, because that is why you stayed to the end, and because it is the only part of this that can do you any good. If you own your land, know your boundary. Walk it. Find the recorded deed, the actual instrument with the metes and bounds in it, not the real estate listing, not the tax card, the recorded deed itself, and read it against the ground until the two of them agree. If there is a homeowners association anywhere near you, go to the county recorder and pull their recorded plat and find exactly where their boundary line stops, because it stops somewhere, and the law required them to record where. Keep a folder, date everything, and write down the times, because my daughter was right, and a year later you will not remember them. If a fine arrives that you do not owe, do not pay it, and do not stand in your driveway screaming about it. Write the date, write the time, mail your answer certified with a return receipt, and put the copy in the folder. Photograph what changes on your property and back it up to 2 places, the way Sam taught me. And when somebody in a costume stands on your gravel and tells you the ground under your boots is functionally theirs, understand that you do not have to win that argument at your gate. You only have to keep your records clean and carry them into the one room where documents actually get read. The universe is slow, but it is fair to the people who keep their paper. If you have ever had a board, a committee, or a clipboard tell you that your own land belonged to them, I would like to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read them. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one, because next week I am going to tell you about a rancher who was ordered to drain his own stock pond by an association that never once checked whether the water in it was protected under a decree older than the state itself. Until then, keep your folder and walk your line.